Hey guys, so in this video we are going to create the user interface for our game. So let's start. And let's just go back to Scratch to see the interface that we have. So we have basically this on the top. We have these labels for the score and the time, these images, and then we have the values of the AMO, the score, and the time that we have in our game. And in Scratch, we don't have an easy way to write stuff in the screen. So everything is a sprite, and we don't have like labels and stuff like that where with fonts that we can write. And so the easiest way to show values in Scratch is to just enable and show the variable, and that we can have this box right here. So, but it's not customizable, so it always has this aspect. And in this case, I went with the easy way, which is to just do this. The more like customizable way, but it's a lot harder, is to use sprites. Like I have these ones here that I ended up not using. It's using sprites with costumes for each one of the numbers, and then you have to just create the code to generate the sprites that you need to show the correct number. So in this case, you need like two different sprites, one with the costume of 9, one with the costume of 0, one by the side of the other. You need to create all this code and instantiate the sprite and everything. And I've done that in my Space Invaders in Scratch game, but here it's just an example. This is just a demo project that we are recreating in Unity, and in Unity we have actual labels and stuff that you can use to create a proper user interface. So I didn't go with all that trouble. So now let's see how we can create this in Unity. Now in Unity, when you want to create an interface or UI, you have this create and you have the UI section. And basically we are going to have all these components. So we have toggles and sliders, scroll views, buttons, we have all this. But in this case, we only need images and text. So let's start by creating an image. And when we create a UI component, you can see that it automatically created three different objects. I mean, the image that we want, we create a canvas and an event system. Just so that you know. So the event system is an object required to have in your game when you want to have to detect input in your UI elements. So if you have like buttons and scroll bars and sliders and stuff like that, this is the object and the components responsible for dealing with all that inputs. And the canvas is basically the root object of all the UI objects that you have in your game. So all the user interface objects exist inside a canvas. And this canvas, you can see that it exists in a different space from our world. So you can see here in the scene view that you have this new rectangle, which is basically our canvas. And it can even show you that they live in separate places, while in the game view they appear one on top of each other. So when you create a canvas, and the canvas has different render modes and scale modes, I'm not going to go into detail about this because this is not the topic of this video, but basically the default render mode of our canvas, which is screen space, means that the canvas is always rendered on top of everything else. So you can see that where the camera is does not affect the canvas whatsoever. It only affects what lives inside the world space, so the canvas doesn't matter where it actually is, and it by default is, you cannot even change the position. So it lives right here, and in this rectangle is where you position and customize all the UI elements that you want in your game. You just enable the 2D mode again. And so now we have our image, and let's call it image bullet. Oh, and we need to import the images for our UI. So we need this bullet image, and we have the time label and the score label. Yeah, we need to import all this. And now let's apply the bullet image to our sprite. Oh, and just so that you know, you can see that our image bullet, so our UI element game object, has some different components from the other ones. So instead of a transform, all UI elements have a Rect transform, which is basically a transform like we have in the world space, but for the UI or the screen space. You can see that has some different options than we have on the other transform, and I'm going to go over some of this in just a bit. And this image component is basically the UI component to show images on the screen. Just like we have the sprite render that shows sprites on the game, on the world space. In the UI, if you want to show an image, you need an image component. And you can see that now our bullet is all stretched, because basically our bullet is stretching the image to fill the rectangle of our image component. So our image is right now with 100 by 100 pixels. So one thing that we usually, it's important to do when you have something like this, is to check the preserve aspect flag. So now you can see that our bullet is with the right proportions, and we can just change the size of our image, and the bullet just keeps the right proportions. Oh, by the way, to do this, you should have the 2D mode enabled, and you should activate the Rect tool, which is a lot easier to work with 2D elements on the UI. And now what we want to do with this bullet first is to set the bullet with the correct size, and you can use the size of our sprite. So you can see that if you select the sprite and you open this preview here, you can see that our sprite is 28 by 45 pixels. So this is the size that we are actually going to use. So 28 by 45 pixels. Now our bullet has the correct size and the correct proportions. And now we want to position our bullet on the top left corner of the screen. So to do this, I'm just going to now minimize the game view. We can just drag, so select the bullet, activate the Rect tool, and just drag the bullet so where we want on our screen. Now, usually when I'm building interface, usually a designer is building the interface for me, and then I just implement the elements on the correct places. But I don't like just dragging stuff and say, okay, this looks, yeah, good enough. No, I like to have like proper values here that I can say, okay, now they have the same distance from the left and from the top and stuff like that. Now, one thing that's important to do when you are building a UI is to work with this anchor system that we have in our elements. And the anchor system basically is a system that defines, or every UI element is anchored to a specific position in the parent game object. Since when we create a default UI element, the parent game object is the canvas, which means that this image is anchored to a position in the screen. So, and by default, all images are anchored to the middle center of the parent. So you can see these arrows right here, and you can see that the anchor system is saying, okay, this image is anchored to the middle center of our screen, which means that if our screen resolution would change, which we are not doing right now, and we are not going to be worried about this, because we are going to build this for this specific resolution, 960 by 720. And what this means, the anchor system is useful, because what this means is that if our screen resolution, not the resolution, the aspect ratio changes, and this happens a lot when you are building, example for mobile, because all different, a lot of devices have different aspect ratios, you need to use this anchor system so that your elements are stay in place independently of the screen aspect ratio. And I can just show you an example, a quick example. So for example, I want my bullet to be on the top left corner, but it's anchored to the middle. So this position that we see here, this offset in the X and the Y, is actually related between the center of our image and the center and the anchor of our image. So this means that my image right now is at minus 447 pixels from the center of the screen, and to 322 pixels up from the center of the screen. So if my screen, the height of my screen was narrow, let's say that, for example, I can use the free aspect. And the free aspect, you can see that I can make my screen, so my canvas is just adjusting, the size of my canvas is just adjusting to the size of my game view. So you can see that now my screen is narrow, and the screen is larger than the bullet is inside. If the screen is narrow, it's not inside. And this is because the bullet will keep the relative position between the center and the anchor where that it has. So the bullet is still anchored to the center and is still keeping these values. But if the screen height is now smaller than what we have here, now the bullet is out of the screen. And to do this, or to change this, we need to use anchors. So in a way, what we want here is to anchor our bullet to the top left corner of our screen, so that in a way, when the screen changes, the relative position of the bullet is always related to the top and not the center, so that in a way, when the screen changes, the bullet moves with the top left corner of the screen. And to do this, we can use these anchor presets. And you can see that we can anchor our image to the top left corner, to the top right corner, to whatever we want. So for example, to the top left corner, now the position that we have here is between the middle of our image and the top left corner of the screen. So if I change this free aspect, you can see that now I can change this, the height of our screen, and the bullet is always anchored to the top left corner. This is exactly what we want. Let's go back to the resolution that we are going to use. And now one other important thing to do here is to also work with the pivot of the image. So like I was saying, is that my image is now anchored to the top left corner, but the positions that we see here are between the anchor position and the center of the image, because the pivot is at 0.5 and 0.5. So if I actually want to position the image, let's say 24 pixels from the left and 24 pixels from the top, I need to do some math, like, okay, so this is 24 from here to here, plus half of the width, stuff like that. And I actually don't want to do that. It's a lot easier if I just change the pivot of the image to the top left corner of the image. So in the way, the positions that we see here are between the anchor and the pivot of the image. And to do that, we can change the pivot by hand. So basically the coordinate system here is 0 on the x is on the left, 1 on the right, and 0 on the y is on the bottom, and 1 is on the top. So for example, here I could set my pivot to 0 and 1, and my pivot would be on the top left corner of my image. And now you can see that if I set 0, 0, my image is aligned with the top left corner, because I changed the pivot to the top left corner of the image, and my image is anchored to the top left corner of the screen. So now the position that I see here are between the pivot and the anchor, which is 0, 0. So it's perfectly aligned with the top left corner. And now if I want to set 24 minus 24, my image is correctly positioned. It's a lot easier to see the offset that we are applying. Now, an easier way to do this, to change, the anchor and the position and the pivot, is when you are using the anchor presets, if you just select, like we did before, you are just setting the anchor. If you press Shift while selecting the anchor, you can see that this blue dot, it means that you are also changing the pivot. So when you do something like this, you are changing the anchor to the top left corner and changing the pivot to 0, 1. And if you do Shift and Alt, the alternate key, you also set the position. So if you do all this, so Shift, Alt, and change the anchor preset, you are saying, okay, anchor the image to the top left corner, change the pivot to the top left corner, and move the pivot to the anchor. And this just sets the image and align it perfectly to the top left corner. And now let's go back to do this again. Okay, so now we have our image bullet. Now let's create images for our other two labels. So the label score here in the middle, let's just say, yeah, the label score and the label type. So let's create two new images, and this is going to be image score. And the image score is going to have the label score. Let's preserve aspect. Let me see what is the size of the label score. 122 by 40. 122 by 40. Doesn't need to be exactly the same size, but we can just set the correct size of our image. And now this score, for example, what we need to do is that we are not going to anchor it to the top left corner. We are going to anchor it to the top middle center of our screen. So let's just use the anchor preset and do what I said before. So Shift Alt and change the corner to the top center. And our label is positioned accordingly. And now we can just move it minus 24, and it's centered in our screen at minus 24 pixels from the top. Actually, this is something really cool, because you can see that if you didn't remember, it was minus 24, you could just drag the label, and you can see that you have like these blue lines, and saying, okay, now I'm aligning this image is aligned with that image on the center, on the bottom, and now it's aligned on the top. And now I just change this to 0 because I moved it a little bit to the left. Oh, and yes, I forgot to talk about this, but on this screen space, this is the 0, 0, when we are talking about the center, is in the middle of the screen. So the 0, the x 0 is related to the anchor, which means that to be aligned, it needs to be the x position of the label needs actually be 0. So, and now we need another label. I'm just going to duplicate this one for the time, and let's change the label. Just check the 97 by 40, so I'm just going to use it in the correct. And now we have these two labels. What we want to do with this is to align this to the right, and let's do -24 and -24. So you can see that using the anchor system is not only good for dealing with aspect ratios, differences and stuff like that, but even for positioning objects and aligning them and everything, it's a lot easier when you are using the anchor system. So this one anchored to the top left corner and the pivot and everything. This one is anchored and the pivot to the top center, and this one to the top right corner. Okay, so now we have our images. Now we need the labels to show the values of our variables. And we need to create a new component, UI component, which is a text. And you have this text mesh pro. Text mesh pro, when you do this, you're going to have this window where you need to import the text mesh pro essentials. And the text mesh pro is basically a plugin that allows us to customize our labels a lot more, and that it renders a lot more on different devices and low-end devices and stuff like that. So you should use the Text Mesh Pro. Before, a few years back, Text Mesh Pro was like an external plugin that you could import into Unity. Now it's integrated in Unity, and it's going to be like the default one that you should use. But you still need to import the Text Mesh Pro as a plugin. So, and now let's call it text AMO. Because I said bullet now. This is image AMO. Because we have three variables. We have the AMO, the score, and the time. So we have the image AMO and have the text AMO. And the text should be in the center of our screen. And let's just say like 0, 0, whatever. And now we want to position this text near our label. And we could do something like this first, so that we change the anchor. We want the text to also be anchored to the top left corner and to change the position. And then we can drag and use the Rect to, you can see, to just align the text correctly with our bullet. And when you select the text, you have the alignment options here. So let's just align it vertically so it looks like this. And I'm just going to snap it. You can snap images one or elements one to the other. And then I'm just going to say, okay, position it like 16 pixels from the bullet. And you can actually just set the, like was here, 16, and you're going to have an offset of 16 from the image. Now, I don't remember if I used custom font. Let me just check. Inter. No, I think I didn't use a custom font. I don't actually remember. Oh, I'm using the Arial. Okay, I'm just going to use this font. That's okay. Oh, and we are using Text Mesh Pro, but here I'm using... Oh, let me just check something. Okay, no problem. Sorry, in my demo project that I used when I was building this, I used the legacy text component, which actually is like here legacy text, which is, this was the old component to creating text. You can see that you have a lot less options to customize, and does not render as good as this Text Mesh Pro component. So you should use this one. Okay, so we have our text AMO, and we're going to use the default font. I didn't get another one, so we are going to use this one, and we just create the other text. So text score, and this one we are going to center here in the screen and snap it to the score label. Doesn't look that good, to be honest, but I'm just going to see if we are going to change it later or not. And we can just set it to bold. Does not have a lot of readability when it's on top of this curtain, but good enough once again. And let's create the text time. And this text time, we are going to snap it here, and then we are going to snap to the label and just set this to the right. Yeah, and it's something like this. Let me just check here on my original project. Yeah, okay. It's something like this. So our labels are like this, and these ones are on the bottom, and this one is on the right of the image. Okay. Good enough once again. And okay, so now we have our labels. And what we need now, and we are not going to complete everything in this video, is to change the values of these labels when we are changing the score, the time, and the aim. And we are going to do that on the game manager on the next video. So I'll see you on the next video, and thanks.